Phoebe Summers walked to the job interview of her life, and an unforeseen event made her arrive covered in mud to compete with impeccably suited men. What she didn't expect was that her selfless act could save her from this nightmare and make even the top executives rethink their actions. The sky cracked open with a violent flash of lightning, illuminating the drenched streets for a single blinding second. Rain hammered down in sheets, turning sidewalks into rivers and puddles into small lakes. Phoebe Summers clutched her folder tight against her chest as she sprinted down Easton Avenue, her heels slipping on the slick pavement. "Not today. Please, not today," she muttered, heart pounding. This wasn't just any interview, it was the interview. Monroe Tech, one of the most influential companies on the East Coast. A job here could erase years of struggle, late nights in cheap diners with half-empty coffee cups, and those relentless, "we regret to inform you" emails. Up ahead, a figure stumbled. An elderly woman, barely visible under a soaked headscarf, slipped near the curb, groceries spilling onto the flooded sidewalk. Phoebe skidded to a stop. "Are you okay, ma'am?" The woman groaned, clutching her knee. Cars splashed past without slowing. Passers-by ducked their heads, pretending not to notice. Without hesitating, Phoebe dropped to her knees in the filthy water, one hand steadying the woman, the other gathering cans and bruised fruit from the gutter. "Let's get you up, all right? Hold on to me." Mud splattered up Phoebe's skirt as she braced herself, lifting the woman to her feet. The old lady gripped Phoebe's arm, eyes glistening with gratitude. "You're an angel, dear. An absolute angel." Phoebe smiled, already soaked through, strands of hair clinging to her face. "You gonna be okay?" "I will now. Thank you." With a quick glance at her watch, Phoebe cursed under her breath. She was already late. She sprinted the remaining block, shoes squelching with every step. Inside Monroe Tech's headquarters, the waiting room for the final round of interviews was a cathedral of glass and chrome, a place where everything gleamed: the floors, the walls, even the immaculately dressed candidates seated along one side. Phoebe burst through the door, breathless, her clothes clinging to her, flecks of mud decorating her blouse and the hem of her skirt. Heads turned. A thin, blonde woman in a sleek gray suit let out a sharp, quiet laugh. Another man leaned over to whisper something to his neighbor, smirks rippling across the row of spotless competitors. Phoebe's heart thudded. She brushed her hair behind her ear, trying in vain to wipe a streak of dirt from her cheek. At the head of the room, 3 executives sat behind a long table. Desmond Todd, a well-groomed man in his 50s with silver at his temples and an expression carved from stone, raised an eyebrow as he looked her over. "And you are?" he asked, voice cold. "Phoebe Summers. I had the 11:30 slot." Desmond checked his watch, then gave a pointed glance at her mud-streaked legs. "Miss Summers," he began, each word sharp enough to cut glass. "I would have thought that presenting oneself professionally for a position here wouldn't be a difficult concept to grasp." Laughter flickered among the other candidates. Phoebe felt heat rise in her cheeks. She opened her mouth to explain, but the words tangled in her throat. There was an old lady." "Save the stories, please," Desmond snapped, waving a hand dismissively. And then the door opened. Ace Monroe stepped in. The room's air changed instantly. Conversations halted. Even the ceiling lights seemed to dim. Ace was nothing like Phoebe expected. Mid-40s, lean, sharp features, a dark tailored suit, but without the self-important air of the executives flanking him. His gaze was steady, unreadable, the kind of look that made you either straighten your back or want to run. He tossed his phone on the table without a word, scanning the room. His eyes landed on Phoebe, a clear anomaly in a sea of corporate polish. The corner of his mouth twitched, though it wasn't quite a smile. "Why the mud?" Ace asked. The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. No one breathed. Phoebe swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. In that instant, something primal, defiant sparked inside her. The silence stretched, thick and oppressive, wrapping around the room like a heavy, wet blanket. Phoebe stood there, soaked to the bone, hair clinging to her face, her heart hammering so loud she could hear it in her ears. Ace Monroe's gaze remained fixed on her, unreadable. A storm behind calm, steel-blue eyes. "Why the mud?" he asked again, softer this time. Not a demand, a genuine question. Phoebe drew a breath. Every instinct screamed to stammer out an apology, to explain she wasn't normally like this, to beg for a second chance. But something about the way Ace was looking at her, the unspoken challenge in it, made her steady herself. She straightened her shoulders. "There was an elderly woman on the corner," Phoebe said quietly, but clearly, letting the words land. "She fell. No one else stopped. So I did." A flicker, barely perceptible, passed through Ace's expression. Before anyone else could speak, Desmond Todd, seated at the far end of the table, let out a low, mocking chuckle. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Oh, come on," Desmond sneered, his voice smooth with condescension. "Spare us the Good Samaritan routine. I've seen this act before. Play the humble, selfless underdog, hope for pity points from the boss. It's textbook." He glanced toward the other executives, seeking agreement. A couple of them exchanged uneasy looks, but none spoke. Phoebe felt a hot knot form in her throat, but she kept her chin up. "I didn't do it for anyone in this room," she said, voice tight. Desmond scoffed again, waving a dismissive hand. "Of course you didn't. You're just naturally heroic." How convenient. The room tensed. Even the other candidates, moments ago snickering, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ace Monroe said nothing, but inside his mind, a door opened. He remembered hard times. A younger Ace Monroe, no older than 12, hunched over a frayed notebook in a dimly lit kitchen. His mother, her face lined with exhaustion, counted loose change on the counter. A battered TV flickered in the corner, the volume turned down to avoid waking Ace's kid brother in the next room. "Go to bed, Ace," she murmured without looking up. "I need to finish this," he replied, eyes scanning the yellowed pages of an old business journal he'd found in a donation box. His mother sighed, brushing damp hair from her face. "You don't have to fix everything, baby." But he did. He always did. Years later, a teenage Ace would fight tooth and nail to keep their tiny apartment, outmaneuvering ruthless landlords. By 22, he was navigating boardrooms filled with men twice his age, some sneering at the kid from nowhere. The rules were never fair, not for people like him. And if there was one thing he'd learned in those brutal rooms and back alleys of corporate ambition, it was this: credentials could be forged, eloquence could be rehearsed, but true character surfaced when people believed no one was judging them. Which was why, unknown to the eager candidates gathered that day, Ace had arranged a different kind of test, one that wouldn't show up on any resume. Later that afternoon, the applicants would be divided into small groups and presented with a deliberately impossible challenge. A fake project brief riddled with conflicting deadlines, vague instructions, and one scarce resource meant to force negotiation. What the candidates didn't know was that it wasn't the solution Ace cared about. It was how they treated each other in the scramble to solve it. Would someone hoard information? Would another quietly advocate for the shyest voice in the room? Who would cut corners and who would notice? It was always revealing. But now, standing before him was this drenched, unyielding woman who had already passed a test no one else knew had begun. Not through clever strategy, but through simple, instinctive decency. Ace glanced at Desmond, noting the smug twist of his mouth. Desmond was sharp on paper, numbers, metrics, flawless connections. But people like Desmond played for power, not principle. And Ace had learned, often the hard way, that companies built on people like that crumbled from within. Desmond's voice cut through again. "Look, Ace, if this is some sort of charity case." Ace lifted a hand, palm out, silencing him mid-sentence. No raise in tone, no scowl, just a single, deliberate gesture. The entire room froze. He looked at Phoebe for a long, unreadable moment, then spoke. "Come back tomorrow." A ripple of murmurs broke out. Desmond straightened, indignant. "Excuse me? She's late. She's unprepared. I'm not done with her," Ace said simply, his tone final. No room for debate. He turned, picked up his phone, and left the room as quietly as he'd entered. Phoebe stood there, unsure what just happened, but something inside her stirred. A spark of hope flickered. Without another word, she gathered her soaked folder, turned and walked out, the smear of mud trailing behind her on the marble floor, a stain nobody would forget. The rain was gone. The storm had left behind a sharp, cold clarity in the air, as if the world itself had been scrubbed clean overnight. Phoebe stood outside the glass tower of Monroe Tech, her reflection shimmering in the spotless glass. She took a steadying breath, smoothed her hair, and stepped inside. The lobby was a cathedral of glass and steel, sunlight bouncing off marble floors, making the place seem unnaturally bright. Phoebe was early. A receptionist greeted her with a polite but distant smile, and she waited alone by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city crawl back to life after the storm. She replayed the words from yesterday in her mind. What did it mean? Was it a pity callback? A genuine second chance? Or was she being set up for more humiliation? The uncertainty gnawed at her. At precisely 9 a.m., a junior assistant appeared and motioned for her to follow. The elevator ride was long and quiet. Phoebe felt every floor like a held breath. When the doors opened, she stepped into a different kind of room from the day before. This one wasn't a sterile interview space, it was a strategy room. Massive glass panels displayed live feeds of company data, stock tickers, and product schematics. A sleek conference table sat at the center, and around it, the power players of Monroe Tech. Ace Monroe was already there. He stood by the window, gazing out at the skyline like a man studying a chessboard, his expression unreadable. Desmond Todd sat at the table, smug, leaning back in his chair as though the outcome was already decided. "Miss Summers," Ace greeted without turning. "Take a seat." Phoebe did. Desmond cleared his throat. "Before we waste more time, I'd like to make something clear. Yesterday was unconventional. I sincerely hope today you've come properly prepared." Phoebe met his eyes. "I came prepared yesterday too, just not for the weather." A few of the other executives exchanged glances. One smirked. Ace finally turned, his gaze sharp. "Let's make this useful. Miss Summers, you have 5 minutes. Here's a scenario. Monroe Tech is launching a new initiative to expand into community-focused technology hubs in under-resourced areas. The board is split. Investors are cautious. There's public backlash over gentrification. What's your move?" "No time to hesitate." Phoebe straightened. "First, acknowledge the backlash publicly. Transparency builds trust. Then partner with existing local nonprofits and youth programs, offer job training, and lease spaces to local entrepreneurs at subsidized rates. Show that Monroe Tech isn't replacing the community, it's investing in it." The room stilled. Ace's expression didn't change, but a flicker of approval crossed one executive's face. Desmond scoffed. "Idealistic. And how do you propose convincing the investors?" Phoebe smiled. "Data. Pilot a single hub. Track economic growth, job creation, and crime reduction stats. Build a case study. When numbers prove social impact boosts long-term profitability, the rest will follow." A pause. Even Desmond faltered. He leaned forward, irritated. "All right, Miss Summers, let's raise the stakes. A media scandal hits. One of our senior execs caught in a personal controversy. Public trust is plummeting. How do you salvage the company's image without exposing internal fractures?" Phoebe didn't blink. "Lead with integrity. Don't bury it. Don't deflect. Issue a statement owning the mistake, outline immediate corrective measures, and launch a public initiative addressing the issue's root cause. Show the public we're accountable and proactive." Desmond opened his mouth to counter, but Ace raised a hand. "That's enough," Ace said quietly. The room fell silent. He stepped closer to Phoebe. "Yesterday, you stopped in the rain to help a woman. Didn't know her. Risked your chance to be here on time. Correct?" Phoebe nodded, unsure where this was leading. Ace's voice lowered, though every word was clear. "That woman's name is Suzanne Monroe. My aunt." A collective intake of breath. Desmond paled. His lips parted, a faint sound escaping before he shut his mouth. Ace's eyes didn't leave Phoebe's. "Desmond, your mother." Silence thickened the air. Desmond's face turned ashen. His polished confidence crumbled as the implications sank in. Ace let the moment stretch. Then he spoke, voice calm, edged in steel. "Yesterday, you mocked the person who saved your own mother's life, without knowing it, and tried to disqualify her for it." Desmond stammered, I wasn't aware." "That's precisely the problem," Ace snapped, the first real fire in his voice. "You didn't ask. You assumed. You judged. You almost cost this company one of the sharpest, most instinctive minds I've seen in years." He turned back to Phoebe. "You handled adversity with poise. You improvised with limited information. You demonstrated character in action, not just words." Ace smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his face. "I've just created a new position, Chief of Community Relations. You'll build it from scratch. Report directly to me." Phoebe's breath caught. She'd imagined a second chance. Never this. Desmond, still pale, made a feeble attempt. "Ace, save it." Ace cut him off. "We'll talk later." He extended a hand to Phoebe. "Welcome to Monroe Tech." For a heartbeat, Phoebe stared at it. This unexpected, impossible turn. Then she gripped his hand firmly. "Thank you. I won't waste it." A murmur rose around the room, though some faces remained rigid, unreadable. Desmond looked down. Ace addressed the room. "Let this serve as a lesson. Credentials are important, but character decides everything." And with that, the meeting adjourned. As Phoebe walked out, the sky was impossibly blue above Monroe Tech's gleaming tower. She felt proud that she had done the right thing. The steady hum of Monroe Tech's headquarters had always been clinical, precise. A symphony of muted conversations, polished shoes against marble floors, and the occasional tap of glass as someone toasted another quarter's profits. But 1 month after Phoebe Summers's improbable entrance into its walls, something was different. The air felt less stifled. The silence wasn't heavy, but charged, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next impossible thing to happen. Phoebe's office wasn't one of those sleek glass corner suites with panoramic city views. It was a modest room 2 floors below the executive wing, its walls still bearing the faint imprint of old company logos from a department that no longer existed. She didn't mind. The desk was solid, the light was good, and, for the first time in her life, she wasn't fighting to be heard. People came to her now, and the first major thing she'd done was tear down the company's internship program. It wasn't a reckless move. 4 years, Monroe Tech had recruited interns from predictable places, Ivy League campuses, exclusive seminars, and friends of board members lists. Character was a formality. Credentials were the currency. But Phoebe, having lived through her own proving ground of mud-splattered suits and prejudice, saw the cracks. She gathered data, testimonies from overlooked applicants, and anonymous surveys from current interns. The evidence was damning. The selection process was built to reward comfort zones, not potential. Within a week, she'd assembled a proposal. Not just a new system, but a new philosophy. Applicants would face ethical dilemmas, social empathy tests, and real-world problem simulations before anyone looked at their GPAs. Some on the board laughed. A few, like old guard executive Lenora Briggs, scoffed openly. But Ace Monroe didn't. He just gave a small, unreadable smile and said, "Let's see what happens." The first orientation under Phoebe's revamped program was nothing short of chaos. Half the candidates who had sailed through traditional interviews crumbled under basic moral hypotheticals. When asked whether they'd cover for a coworker's minor mistake that cost a client nothing, but risked a scolding from a superior, most chose to lie. When placed in a simulated scenario where they had to allocate limited resources between 2 equally promising but struggling departments, the majority chose the one that offered them the greatest personal visibility. But then there were the others, those whose names no one had bothered to learn before. Kids from state schools, community colleges, military veterans in career pivots. One young woman, an ex-waitress named Layla Hudson, refused a hypothetical bribe in a simulation even when promised a guaranteed full-time offer. A soft-spoken intern named Michael Green calmly de-escalated a staged conflict between two irate managers in under 2 minutes. The very people the old program would have overlooked were revealing SteelCore's Phoebe knew all too well. Word of the shakeup spread like wildfire through the company. Some grumbled. Some, like Desmond Todd, seethed. For Desmond, the weeks following that humiliating interview had been torment. The revelation that the drenched woman Phoebe had helped was his own mother, Suzanne Monroe, had rattled him to his core. Worse, knowing he tried to sabotage the very person who'd saved her gnawed at him in quiet, sleepless nights. The smug, unshakable executive who once barked orders like decrees found himself avoiding mirrors. He started noticing things he'd ignored before. The overworked receptionist covering for a sick colleague. The janitor who discreetly covered an embarrassed intern's spilled coffee. Desmond began to realize how many small, invisible kindnesses kept the company running. How much of it had passed beneath his notice, deemed insignificant in the hunt for quarterly gains. On a rainy Thursday evening, not unlike the one that had started it all, Desmond stood outside Ace Monroe's office. Ace looked up from his desk, his face expressionless as always. "Problem?" he asked, though something in his gaze suggested he already knew. Desmond hesitated, then stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I need to own up to some things." Ace said nothing. He just gestured toward the chair. Desmond sat, the weight of his years at Monroe pressing down on him. "I was wrong. About Phoebe. About a lot of things. I've pushed people aside, covered my tracks, made decisions for the wrong reasons. I thought it was survival. Maybe it was ambition. Doesn't matter now. I nearly lost my mother because I was too busy playing power games." Ace's eyes softened, though his voice remained steady. "You didn't nearly lose her, Desmond, but you lost your way." The words hit harder than any shouted accusation. "I don't expect a clean slate," Desmond said quietly, "but I'd like a second chance." Ace leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "There's no clean slate here, Desmond. Actions leave marks. But marks can teach. I'm placing you on extended leave. No meetings, no calls, no backroom influence. Spend time with your family. Get to know the people you step over on your way to the top. If, when you come back, you still want a seat at this table, we'll see who you are by then." Desmond swallowed the knot in his throat and nodded. "Thank you for not firing me." "I didn't say I wouldn't," Ace replied dryly. "I said we'll see." The next day, the executive floors buzzed with rumors. Some claimed Desmond had been demoted. Others swore he'd resigned. Only Ace, Phoebe, and a few close aides knew the truth. And none of them were talking. Under Phoebe's influence, the company culture began to shift in quiet, seismic ways. The new internship program went public, drawing praise from industry journals and cautious curiosity from competitors. Employee turnover dipped. Morale, long stagnant, inched upward. Departments started nominating unsung employees for monthly recognition. Small things, but they added up. Phoebe never asked for credit. When Ace formally introduced her at a quarterly board meeting, calling her one of the best decisions this company ever made, she flushed, then deflected the applause toward her team. "Good ideas don't come from titles," she said simply. "They come from people who've been where it hurts." As the meeting adjourned, Ace lingered behind, watching Phoebe as she spoke with a young developer about a volunteer project. He allowed himself a rare, genuine smile. For a man who had built his empire on instincts, it was clear, in bringing Phoebe Summers into Monroe Tech, his gut hadn't failed him. And somewhere out there, in a bustling city soaked in rain and possibility, someone else's muddy, unexpected moment was waiting. This story reminds us how a single act of kindness can rewrite your destiny and expose those who hide behind power. What would you have done if you were Phoebe, standing there covered in mud? Tell us in the comments. And if this story moved you, hit that like button, share it, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more powerful stories. See you in the next video.